Welcome to Literary AF Podcast.
Bonjour, mon amis. Welcome to Literary AF Podcast. I'm Sheldon.
I'm Danny.
And today we've got a special treat for you. We're going to talk about books. Like most days.
Yeah.
Danny, are you sick?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I actually just woke up from a nap like 10 minutes ago, so.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm sleepy.
I just finished reading the book that I have to talk about now. So I haven't had time to fully process it, but
right.
At the same time, I'm also very excited to talk about it because I just finished it. So.
Right. Well, that's good. It's still fresh in your memory.
Yeah. Oh, I should say what the book is. Today we're looking at Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
All right.
It was written in 1932.
Okay.
Or, I think.
A long time ago.
She lived from 1907 to 1989. She first started publishing in 1928. 1931 was her first novel.
Okay.
And then it says, but it wasn't until Rebecca that she became popular, but it doesn't say when Rebecca was released.
Of course not.
The period of the book is like 20s, 30s, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Like it's in England and it's definitely before World War II.
Right.
So somewhere in that time period. It is I don't know how to classify this book. I guess it's like the ending is pretty suspenseful.
Right.
Maybe suspense.
It sounds like a thriller, I guess.
It could be a thriller.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a science fiction or a romance.
Right.
It is not gangster rap or a sonnet. And those are the only four genres I know.
Right.
No, I should start talking about this book. So Rebecca is... Okay, it's a story about a girl.
Okay.
Can you guess what her name is?
Rebecca.
No, she doesn't get a name.
What?
The main protagonist does not have a name in this story.
What?
Yeah, it's lots of fun.
Okay.
Well, because it's from first-person perspective.
Okay.
And it's actually one of the big themes in this book is that she doesn't really have much of an identity throughout the book.
Okay.
She becomes a little confident later on, but at the beginning especially, she's just sort of like the companion. She doesn't really do much. So this girl, she's young. She's, I think she's 19 or 20, maybe 21. She is working in Monte Carlo in France as a companion for an American traveling woman. I think it's basically like a maid who used to like kind of travel with like rich people.
Oh, okay.
And she doesn't do like maid duties, but she does like sets up appointments and plays cards with the old lady and like sets up lunches and stuff for the old lady.
Right.
So she's with this lady named Mrs. Van Hopper. Mrs. Van Hopper is very it's like she's like a bad American stereotype where she's like very like brusque. I don't know what's a good word for it. Like obnoxious kind of.
Okay.
And she's always like loudly talking and she's like not hiding her true feelings like a good Brit might do.
Blunt?
Very blunt. Blunt's a good word.
Okay.
But also like kind of ignorant too, because she's not being blunt to be honest. She's being blunt because she doesn't know better.
Right.
I guess.
Right.
Anyway, she's with Mrs. Hopper and they go for lunch one day and they see this rich gentleman having lunch there. And Mrs. Van Hopper is like, "Oh, that's Maxim de Winter." Wait, I don't know where Miss Van Hopper is from. I know she goes to America at one point in the story, but my natural inclination is to do a British accent.
Yeah, you just went straight up Mrs. Bennett on that one.
Okay, let's see. Well, yeehaw, that day. Sorry. I will refrain from doing accents for the rest of the episode.
We'll see about that.
My fingers were crossed, so. I might be lying. Anyway, so she sees him and she's like, "Oh, that's Mr. De Winter. He owns that famous mansion in England called Mandalay, which is very important. Mandalay is very important in this book."
Okay.
And so she's trying to like get Mr. De Winter to come to their table, and she's being very like obnoxious and like weird about it. And Rebecca, or not Rebecca, I'm gonna call her Rebecca all the time, but the protagonist's name is not Rebecca. Rebecca.
For sure it's not?
It's 100% not.
Okay.
So protagonist, she is very embarrassed by Mrs. Van Hopper.
Right.
Eventually they like make conversation with De Winter, with Maxim, and the main character just feels very awkward about the whole thing. She is, when she gets a chance, like when Van Hopper's taking her naps or whatever, main character will wander around the city and like do sketches, and sometimes she'll have breakfast by herself downstairs. Van Hopper gets sick in Monte Carlo and is restrained to her room, and in the mornings, protagonist is allowed to leave just to like go out for a little bit. And so while she's out, she runs into Maxim De Winter again.
Okay.
And oh, I should have also mentioned Maxim De Winter is newly widowed, and that's one of the things that Van Hopper kept bringing up. Okay. Which is like kind of a no-no, you'd think. Like, hey, your wife just died. How are you?
Oh, yeah. And she was saying that like to his face all the time. That's kind of weird.
So anyway, so the new single, Maxim De Winter, starts talking to the protagonist, the young lady. They go on drives together through the city. He wants her to see the city. They have little like meals together, and they have like, I don't want to say like outright dates, but they're basically dates. Right. And then she finds out that Van Hopper gets a message one day that her daughter is going back to America, and she wants Van Hopper to join her. So Van Hopper's like, yeah, let's go. It's time to go. Tells the protagonist, okay, we're leaving. And then protagonist starts freaking out because she's falling for this rich older guy, and she's like, I'm never going to get to see him again. Right. So then she goes, and it's like kind of awkward. They have like, the main character is very shy and very like nervous to say things, especially at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And so she doesn't know how to tell Maxim that she's leaving forever. And so she just goes up to his room and acts really awkwardly while he's trying to have his breakfast. And he figures it out and is like, well, I guess that's settled. Do you want to go with her, or do you want to marry me and come back to my mansion? Right. And she decides she wants to marry him because she does not want to be with Van Hopper as a traveling companion. They get married. They have a quick honeymoon in Italy before she goes back to the giant mansion of Mandalay. Right. And Mandalay is where the majority of this book takes place. Okay. It's a huge mansion. Oh, I should also mention, he gives the main character a poetry book at one point. And in the front cover, it says, "For you, Max." And then with like a fancy calligraphy R, I think. Okay. Or possibly it says Rebecca. I don't remember. Okay. But anyway, she figures out that it's a gift from his dead wife. And she gets really jealous and tears up the page. And
wait, he gives her a book that his dead wife gave him? Yeah. Okay, that's awkward.
It's his favorite poetry book, and she had never read it. Okay. So it was like, I don't know if it was a gift or like a loan.
It could have just been a loaner.
Yeah. But either way, she ripped up the page that with the "for you" from your dead wife. Right. Okay. In the mansion, there's lots of servants there. Most of them aren't important except for... actually, most of them aren't important except for Mrs. Danvers. Mrs. Danvers is a creepy older woman who makes protagonist feel very uncomfortable all the time. Right. And is very like harsh and stern, and is constantly reminding the main character that she is not as good as Rebecca was, which is another common theme in this book. There's not a lot that happens in the first half of this book. Mm-hmm. It's more just set up for the second half, which is really, really good. Spoiler. Yeah. So they have people over a few times. Max's sister Beatrice, who's very blunt and very funny, and the main character likes her a lot. There's Frank, who is Max's business partner, that's always like kind of helping main character, and he's the only one that main character feels comfortable talking about Rebecca with.
Right.
And because Rebecca's also a very mysterious figure, because no one will bring her up around Max, and the main character wants to find out more, but like doesn't feel comfortable asking anyone about Rebecca.
Right.
One half of the house, the West Wing, where Max used to live with his old wife, with Rebecca, that whole side has been closed off.
Right.
And now they live on the East Wing, and like the West Wing is like this forbidden place that the main character is always like very like intrigued by and very tempted to go explore.
Is this going to be like a Mr. Rochester situation?
No, at no point does Maxim pretend to be a gypsy. Wait, which part did you mean?
Keeping his wife in the attic or something, like locked away?
No, this is not that. Although that would have been a pretty good twist. This one has an okay twist. They wander down to the bay a few times, the harbor. There's this like there's two paths that go down to the bay, and the dog always wants. Oh, they have a dog named Jasper.
Okay.
And protagonist likes taking Jasper for walks. That's a major part of this book. Jasper always wants to run down this like one dark like narrow path, but Max always tries to drag main character down this like bright flowery path. They both lead to different sides of the beach. One day, Jasper runs off to the other side of the beach. Then protagonist goes to chase the dog, and Max gets very mad about this. He acts very like Maxim is kind of a jerk in this book. It makes sense later on, but there's a lot of parts where he'll just get mad at the protagonist, and she has no clue why.
Right.
So she goes to the other side of the beach and finds the like old sailing house, and there's a crazy I don't like using the word crazy, but there's like a man who was in an asylum at one point,
right.
Who lives there, and he tries to talk to her, but it's very like what he says doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
I mean, it makes some sense to the reader, but it makes no sense to the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'll say, "You're not mean like the other one was," which to anyone with a brain, they're like, "Oh, Rebecca was mean to this guy," but to the protagonist, it's like he's talking nonsense.
Right. Okay.
So, she goes to the side of the beach to get the dog back. Max gets really mad. They kind of have a little fight over nothing, get back to the house. Max leaves, I think, around this point. Oh, no, there's a long stretch of, like, protagonist going from house to house, like, greeting all the neighbors and, like, doing that old, like, social networking stuff that I'm guessing rich British people had to do back in the day before, like, I don't know. You know, back in the day when like people used to always like get to know their neighbors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And especially if you're rich and you had to like do the networking stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So she's doing a lot of that. They all talk about how great Rebecca was, how much they loved her, and she feels so like kind of jealous, but also just like she feels super unworthy to be the next Mrs. De Winter.
Right.
They also always bring up the fancy dress ball, and that's going to be very important soon.
Okay.
At one point, Max leaves for a while. He goes to London for some business trip with Frank. And main character is wandering through the house. Or no, she's outside in the garden or something. And then she spots this like fancy sports car in the hidden behind some hedges, like off the main road. And then she sneaks into the house and sees that there's some guy talking to Mrs. Danvers, the like maid or whatever she is that main character doesn't like.
Right.
And so so they're like talking about like hush stuff. She's like, you know, you're not allowed at the house. If Max sees you here, you're gonna get in trouble. And the guy's like, I don't care. To heck with him. I can't remember what his name is Jack Favell.
Okay.
And he's painted as like this drunk, like immoral man. And
Okay.
he hits on the main character. He's Danvers knows him, but it's unclear like how she knows him at the start.
Right.
And he's like a Lesher, I think is a good word for it.
Okay.
I don't know. But he's just like, he's drunk, he's kind of creepy, and main character does not like him at all, and he like flirts with her a lot and like tries to get her to leave with him in the car, and then he's like, well, don't tell your husband I was here, haha, and then leaves.
Okay.
Maxim sees this, or he gets home early or something, and then someone tells him that this guy was there, and then he goes to Danvers and loses it on her and yells at her, and Danvers thinks that the main character told on her, or told on Jack.
Okay.
Next thing, and that starts a little seed that grows up soon later.
Okay.
Now it's time for they decide that they want to have another fancy dress ball. A bunch of random people show up at their house and are like, oh, Mandalay, you must give us the tour. And they're like, haha, okay. And remember that one part in Pride and Prejudice where they all show up at Darcy's house and they have to give them the tour of the house? Like Elizabeth and the uncle and aunt.
Oh, yeah, they go to Pemberley.
They go to Pemberley and they do the tour. So I guess that was just a thing.
Yeah, they used to just do that. Like these really rich, fancy houses. You could just go to them and like you do walking tours through people's houses.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
So that happens and they're like, oh, we don't want to, but it's like our like duty or whatever. Mm-hmm. So they give these people a tour. They're going on and on about the fancy dress ball. And I think main character feels a little like challenged by this because, Rebecca would throw these balls and she never could. And she's like, no, we'll do it. And Frank and Max are like, oh, you want to do one? And then she's like, yeah, why not? Let's do it. And they're like, okay. Neither of them seemed like too excited by it, but they're like, well, if this will make you happy, let's do it. And the point of the fancy dress ball is you dress up like, it's like a Halloween party, but it's not like people aren't dressing up like ghosts and stuff. They're dressing up as like, it's either cultural appropriation. They're like, hey, we came as someone from the Orient.
Oh.
Which is like half the costumes.
Right.
And it's kind of funny, but in like a, oh man, this would not be good today.
Yeah.
Kind of way.
Yeah.
Like one of those like pointing at the past and laughing, being like, oh, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the other costumes are like historical costumes, like, oh, I came as Cromwell or whatever.
Right.
And main character isn't sure what she should dress up as. And Max keeps suggesting, he's like, oh, you should put a ribbon in your hair and go as Alice in Wonderland. And then she's like, no, the main character is like, she's like a little girl. I don't want to be seen as a child. And he's like, come on, I think it'd be perfect with your hair. And then she gets really offended. And I don't understand what that was about. So apparently it's offensive to have Alice hair.
You're blonde.
Maybe it was she's blonde.
I don't know.
But she made some comment about her hair being straight. And I was like, did Alice have notoriously straight hair? I don't get but anyway, so it's a big deal.
I don't know.
Then sneaky Mrs. Danvers, she suggests, hey, why don't you go walking through the West Wing and looking at these portraits of like Max's like ancestors and you can dress up as one of them. And she points out one in particular that's like, this lady in the white dress, you should go as her. And sure enough, the main character does this. She finds the one. She's like, oh, that's a beautiful dress. She sketches it down and then sends it to a London dressmaker and they send her out she sends her out that dress. And she's determined she's going to surprise everyone, especially Max, because Max keeps like trying to make her look like a little girl and she thinks she's going to look like a dignified like woman.
Right.
So the night of the party happens, and this is where the book like really kicks off from being like kind of dry, rich British stuff to like, oh, this book's exciting now.
So this is like halfway point-ish?
Yeah, we're at like just over halfway.
Okay.
So the fancy dress ball happens. She comes out in her dress, and she thinks everyone's going to love it because she thinks it looks amazing. But when she walks out, no one says anything. It's dead silence.
Oh, no.
And then...
Did she dress up like Rebecca?
Yes, she did.
Oh, no.
Max is super offended and is like, go change right now. He's like, I don't care what you wear, but you're not wearing that to this party. And she like doesn't understand what she's done, the main character. She runs off crying. It takes Max's sister and I think Frank to like come in and try to console her and convince her to come downstairs.
Right.
She doesn't know what happens until later. Somebody tells her that at the last fancy dress ball they had, that was the exact outfit that Rebecca wore. Right. So Danvers kind of set her up.
Right.
So they have this party. It goes very like,
Awkward as hell.
yeah, but it's not everyone saw her in the dress at first, so the main crowd didn't like realize.
Right.
But like she spends the whole night thinking that like Maxim hates her now, that she did something like unforgivable.
Right.
She is the whole night they don't get a chance to talk because there's so many people around, and she's like trying to explain herself, but she doesn't get a chance. Maxim doesn't come to bed that night. Oh, and they have separate beds. I don't know if that was like an old British thing.
That I think is just like an old church thing. Married
Okay.
couples slept in separate beds.
So yeah, because Max doesn't come to his bed that night, and when she wakes up in the morning, she notices that Max's bed is still like totally tucked in,
Right.
and she's like very concerned that, oh, he didn't come to bed. That means he hates me now. This marriage is over. I had a good run. I've been here for 6 months. Like she's right off the deep end right away. And also they stay up like the entire night. Like she goes to bed at like 5 a.m,
Right.
which I didn't imagine people in the olden days partied that hard, but apparently they did.
Apparently they did.
So she is like in a bad state. She's wandering around the house. Nobody's there. She can't find Max. And then she decides to confront Mrs. Danvers because Mrs. Danvers put her up to wearing that outfit. And Mrs. Danvers is... I can't remember if Mrs. Danvers sees her and says something creepy or if she goes seeking out Mrs. Danvers. But anyway, they have a really weird confrontation in like the second story or third story like in the third story room, and Mrs. Danvers tries to get her to jump out the window and kill herself.
What is up with this bitch?
I know, it goes crazy. And like she goes from being like mildly weird to like jump out the window. You'll never feel it, it'll break your neck. And it's like,
Wow.
it gets pretty good. So yeah, Mrs. Danvers tries to convince her to do this, and then protagonist is like on the edge of the window and she doesn't know what to do because Danvers is like holding her there, and she's also freaking out because she thinks Maxim hates her too. So she's kind of like, maybe this would be good, but not in like a seriously considering suicide, but in like a, what do I have to live for anyway right now?
Right.
And it's a very intense and uncomfortable little passage.
Yeah.
But I loved it, of course. Then they hear the sound of like cannons firing, and they get really like, they're really nervous. They don't know what it is. And then they see Maxim running across the lawn from the window, and he yells that a boat's like scuttled or whatever in the harbor. So like, I guess a boat like hit the bottom of the ocean or whatever in their little harbor and fired off their cannon as like a distress.
Okay.
So they all run down to the harbor, except for Danvers just stays in the room or something. I don't know, being weird. But after Max shows up, Danvers lets her go, and then main character runs away. Main character goes to the harbor. She still can't talk to Max because he's busy like helping these guys get off the boat. They send a diver down to see what the boat hit, and they discover that it was Rebecca's old sailing boat. Now, when Rebecca died, she was lost at sea, and they thought she drowned.
Right.
But they found her old sailing boat, and they found a body inside.
Oh.
And the door was locked shut. So the body was locked inside the sailing boat.
Right.
That's when Maxim finally decides to come clean to his wife, to the main character. He admits that he actually murdered Rebecca. And I think it's a good twist.
Okay.
And it's very set up. I think it's set up to be like, you're supposed to be afraid of Maxim in that scene because he's been kind of a random jerk throughout the book, and now he admits he's a murderer.
Yeah.
But then in the very next scene, he describes what happened, and Rebecca was basically, at least according to him, there could be some unreliable narrator stuff going on here for sure, but at least according to him, Rebecca was like this super manipulative, like evil person who like would make you love her to your face, but then like stab you in the back the second she could.
Okay.
And Maxim married her without really realizing this, and then once they were married, he started to realize what kind of person she was and started to like hate his life basically. And she took like numbers of other lovers. She was constantly like wasting Maxim's money, like Maxim's wealth, his family's wealth.
Right.
And was like, she was seducing like Frank, the business partner. She seduced, or tried to seduce Beach, like his sister's husband, so his brother-in-law.
Right.
And Maxim was like, you have to stop this, Rebecca. And Rebecca was like, just try it. Basically, she threatened to... Oh, I can't remember what her threat was. But she started making a bunch of threats and was trying to blackmail Maxim. And was like, I'm going to go for a divorce, and then I'm going to say this, this, and this. And I can't remember. But she was trying to make Maxim seem like he was powerless to stop her.
Right.
And then he just shot her.
Oh.
And it was like, on the one hand, I was like, man, killing your wife is a bad look. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, okay. If someone is trying to put you in that spot where they like have all the power and then you just turn and shoot them, that's kind of a power move, in my opinion.
I mean, yeah, murder is the ultimate power move, I'd say. So
That's a good quote. Someone should save that. Murder is the ultimate power move, Danny. But so it's weird because you'd think in a book, if someone admitted to murdering their spouse, you would like hate that character or you wouldn't trust that character.
Yeah.
But this book does a really good job of like, it doesn't seem like Maxim's ever the bad guy. And actually, after this scene, you start to like Maxim more, and the protagonist especially is like, oh, there's no secrets between us anymore. She thought Maxim was still in love with Rebecca. So the fact that she found out that he like really hated her, she becomes much more confident after this point in the book.
Right.
Because she's like, oh, he loves me because I'm different than Rebecca, not I can't compare to Rebecca.
Right.
And so they have this inquest because Maxim had previously identified a body that he said was Rebecca, but it was just some random person that had washed up on the shore like months after the accident.
Right.
So they have to have an inquest because like, well, you identified the wrong body. And then at the inquest, the boat maker was like, people were saying that I sunk this boat or that my shoddy craftsmanship did it. So I took a look and I found that the boat was like somebody had punched holes in the boat and that it didn't just sink on its own. And so all of a sudden they're like, oh, so maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe there's some foul play here. And actually what Maxim had admitted to protagonist privately that he had shot Rebecca, put her in the cabin of her sailboat. Basically, he opened some of the things at the bottom of the boat to let the water in. Mm-hmm. I think they're called like seacocks or something funny like that. So he opened those, and then the boat started slowly filling with water, and he like took the dinghy and like basically just abandoned it to sink itself in the ocean.
Right.
And hoping that it would never be found. But because this boat happened to just scrape along the other boat, it's like he got discovered.
Right.
So they think they have this meeting, and then they decide. Main character is freaking out. She faints. She's like, "Oh, Maxim's been discovered. I'm going to become the wife of a murderer. Like, I'm going to become the widow after they hang him for his crimes."
Right.
She's losing it, and then she's at home worrying because they don't let her stay after she faints. And then Maxim gets home and is like, "Oh, they found they ruled it a suicide." So she's kind of ecstatic for like a moment, and then Jack Favell, the like lecturer or whatever from before, he shows up and is like, yeah, I know it's not a suicide, and unless you pay me a certain amount a year, then I'm gonna go tell the cops.
Right.
And then Maxim's like, go tell the cops, I don't care.
Oh.
And then he's like, I'm gonna go call them right now. So he calls the cops, who show up, and they don't believe Favell's story, and Favell's really drunk, so like he kind of has the upper hand. But then he has a note that Rebecca wrote him that was like, from the day she died, that said, I'm going to come see you tonight, and I have something important to tell you. And then he was like, why would she kill herself if she had something important to tell me?
Right.
And they were like, oh, that's right, nobody could ever kill themselves if they wanted to tell somebody something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it wasn't a very woke way of looking at suicide, I guess, but they kind of like, oh, this is kind of proof that she didn't want to die. They asked Mrs. Danvers if Mrs. Danvers knew anything, and Danvers at first is like, no, she'd never kill herself. I don't know what's going on. And then she starts to figure out what Favell is implying when he says that Rebecca didn't kill herself. and she starts to go crazy, and only the protagonist notices the way that Danvers is staring at Maxim, and she's like, oh, this is not going to end good. They end up finding a thing in her appointment book. It was a meeting with a doctor. They go find the doctor, and the doctor says, oh, well, it turns out she had cancer, like she was dying.
Oh.
So they're like, oh, so it makes sense why she killed herself. Case closed. And Favella's super mad. Maxim and main character are both like wiping the sweat from their forehead.
I just like have this picture of like Police Chief Wiggums, like, bake them away, toys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more like, so Maxim's rich, so it's like, oh, well, a rich man could never murder his wife. What are you talking about?
Rich people are not nefarious.
Yeah. And then, and Favella's constantly implying this too, because he's like, oh, you guys have your lunches together, and then you're like a union where you keep each other's secrets. And so Favella's all bummed out when he finds out that Rebecca had cancer, and that he still doesn't think she killed herself, but it's like, well, now they have proof that she had a motivation to kill herself.
Right.
And then they get home and discover that Mrs. Danvers had set the mansion on fire.
What?
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, Mrs. Danvers had gone crazy and decided to burn down the entire mansion. And it actually ends right there.
What?
But there are, like, throughout the book, there are, like, little, like, asides of, like, where it's in the future, and main character and Maxim are living, like, they're going from hotel to hotel, they're traveling constantly, they're, like, going through Switzerland or something.
Right.
So it's, like, after the mansion burns down, they just leave England.
Right.
But the way it ends is so abrupt, because it's like, we're driving, I was like, oh, I think I see the sunrise, and it's like, no, that's the west, not the east, and it's too early, it's only like 2 a.m, because they drove all night. And then they're like, but there's a bright red light coming from over the distance, and then Maxim's like, that's Manderley. And then they get there, and it's like, I'll read the last paragraph. It's,
'Kay.
You would never guess that it's the last paragraph of a book.
Okay.
The road to Mandalay lay ahead. There was no moon. The sky above our heads was inky black, but the sky on the horizon was not dark at all. It was shot with crimson, like a splash of blood, and the ashes blew towards us with the salt wind from the sea. That's it.
Wait, what?
That's it.
That's it?
Yeah, it ends right there.
Really?
Yep, no further explanation needed.
Are you sure your book is complete?
I actually wondered if maybe there was like... But it's like, there's nothing after that at all. There's not a single page after that. It's the back cover. Like, there's not even like a, check out these other books by Rebecca de Mornay or whatever.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
That...
Also, I just called Daphne du Maurier Rebecca de Mornay. So forgive me, anyone named Rebecca de Mornay who's listening to this. Yeah, it's actually, though, I super like this book. The first half is kind of dry. It's kind of like your typical, like, oh, there's rich English people living together. You know, it's kind of a romance, but also Max is kind of a jerk, so it's not like a great romance. There's lots of annoying people around. But
right.
At the same time, and the main character is like sort of, she's kind of a nothing character at the beginning, but that's kind of her point, is that she is a ghost compared to Rebecca.
Right.
Who for a while also, this book implies that Rebecca is an actual ghost living in the mansion.
Okay.
I didn't bring it up because it's never like, it's not a main thing they lean
Yeah.
into. It's just kind of every once in a while she'll think she sees something, and it's always Mrs. Danvers.
Okay.
Every time she sees something weird, it's Mrs. Danvers.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
I would recommend this book.
Yeah.
It's it is fun. It's very suspenseful. I read the last 200 pages. I read in the course of like 2 days, and not just because I had to record this podcast, but because I was super into it.
Yeah.
There's a few like passages I particularly enjoyed and I underlined. There's one here. I can't remember what we're saying. So when she's talking about her, I think she's talking about herself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. She's talking about how she had this vision of what Rebecca was like and how people saw her. And then she says, I wondered how many people there were in the world who suffered, and continue to suffer, because they could not break out from their own web of shyness and reserve, and in their blindness and folly built up a great distorted wall in front of them that hid the truth. And it's like kind of a nice... tried to say neat. It's like she's... This whole thing, there's so many problems in this book that come up because of her perspective, and because she's too, like, shy and nervous to say anything to anybody.
Right.
And that it's like, so she creates this vision of like, oh, Max doesn't like me, or like, even though he married her after like a couple of weeks, like,
yeah,
he doesn't like me, or oh, this person hates me, or oh, this person loves Rebecca, when like really if she just talked to them she would have found out the truth like a lot earlier.
Right.
And I don't know, I kind of like that.
Right. So what was this maid's problem? Why was she...
Oh, yeah, I didn't really explain Danvers' deal.
Yeah.
Danvers was Rebecca's maid from when she was a child.
Okay.
And stayed with her like when she got married.
Right.
Rebecca, being as like manipulative as she was, like Danvers was almost like a fanatic, like almost like a follower of hers. Okay. Where like anything Rebecca said was like golden and like pure, and anybody who like doubted Rebecca was wrong. Right. And so she just like, she was like this devoted follower of Rebecca, and anything Rebecca did was perfect. And so she loved Rebecca, and so she hated the new wife. Right. Because, but she didn't, Danvers also didn't realize what happened between Max and Rebecca, and in her mind, she thought that Max was miserable, and that this new wife was like, would never succeed in making him happy. Right. So she was like constantly reminding protagonist of this. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, Danvers is kind of a jerk. Right. Well, she is. She is. Her character is the jerk.
She was trying to get her to kill herself.
And Favel was, he claimed to be Rebecca's cousin, which he might have been. Okay. Because it was the olden days and gross. But he was also her lover. That's why. Okay. That's why Max hated him, and that's why he was always secretive about coming to Mandalay to see Danvers. Right. Who he also knew because of Rebecca. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, it's so yeah, like I don't know how to define this book, like what genre it would really be.
Mystery / thriller maybe?
Yeah, I'd say so.
It doesn't sound like it's straight up like horror or anything.
No.
The beginning is like romance.
Yeah.
But it takes a twist there.
Yeah, I'd say up until like the fancy dress ball, it's kind of like I would say it's almost like a bland romance. Right. Where it's like, because it's got all the romantic beats, but also like there's no like big romantic moments, or no like, Max doesn't make you fall in love with him at all. Right. He's kind of a jerk. He's rich and he's got a mansion, but he's not like Darcy. Like Darcy is like, oh, he's a jerk at the beginning, but then you like fall in love with him as like you get to know what his character's about. Yeah. Max is more like, he's kind of a jerk at the beginning, and then you get to like understand him when you realize what his character's about.
You realize he actually murdered his wife?
Yeah, but also too, like I didn't think of him as a murderer after that point. I thought of him more like he was like, he had to deal with a problem in a very bad way.
Yeah, there's better solutions than murder, but you know.
Yeah, I guess I would agree. No, I would agree with that 100% in real life. But in the context of this book, it almost works. Like, it kind of makes sense, I think. Right. And just, like, I don't remember exactly what Rebecca says during that passage where he, like, decides to finally shoot her. But, like, if a movie villain had given that same speech and then the hero shot them, I'd be like, okay, all right, I get it.
Okay, sure.
I'm just trying to describe why, because I was also thinking about that when I was reading it. Like, how come I'm okay with this guy murdering his wife? Because in any other, like, story, I wouldn't be okay with that. Right. But in this tale, I'm just kind of like, yeah, well, Rebecca, she was a real jerk.
Right. Yeah, I get that, yeah. There are usually better ways to, separate from your wife, though.
There are
than
often better
murder.
ways,
Yes.
but you know what? If you're rich and British and you have a sailing boat.
Yeah, if you're rich, you can basically do whatever you want. That's firmly established in the world, so...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? If she has a sailing ship, you just throw her in the bottom and nobody will know.
Nobody will ever find it.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It's very enjoyable. It's I think the main character is like, you know, I got a few like Bella vibes from her because you know how Bella is severely lacking in personality?
Oh, Bella from Twilight.
Yeah.
Yeah,
At least in like the beginning of Twilight.
right.
She's like, I turned on my favorite search engine and
Yeah.
searched.
Oh, God, I just got flashbacks. Yeah.
I was getting like minor versions of that from this because like the main character, like she likes sketching,
Yeah.
she likes the flowers, and she likes going for walks with a dog.
But, like, I think in the case of this book, she's plain and average because she's supposed to be, like,
Yeah.
you know, nothing
Yeah.
compared to Rebecca. Whereas Bella was plain and average just because.
Just because.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this one definitely, it's a theme like with Rebecca.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a theme too of like, where this girl is like a serious outsider. Like she doesn't know these rich British people.
Right.
She was working as like basically an au pair kind of thing, like
Right.
for an older lady without kids, but like she's maybe lower middle class at best.
Okay.
And she's like, she doesn't have family. Like I think it said that her family died when she was like a teenager, and she like, after she finished her education, she just got this job because it was a job.
Right.
And yeah, so it's like and there's also too a lot of like, she understood the servants better than the like rich people at times, and like she bonds with her maid Clarice, who doesn't do anything important in the book, so I didn't bring her up.
Right. Clarice.
I think her name's Clarice. Maybe it's like Cherice or something.
Okay.
But it's something close to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it, although I kind of spoil it.
Yeah.
Maybe go back in time and don't listen to this podcast before you read it.
I can put spoiler warnings in the show notes.
Oh, maybe,
So,
yeah.
You know.
And if we remember, we can like find the timestamp of when I start really giving away spoilers. Well, I don't have the energy for that.
Well, when you're editing it, if you happen to really take note of when that is, you can just let me know and I'll put it in the show notes.
If editing Sheldon notices.
If editing Sheldon notices.
Yeah, so then that's the book. Oh, wait, what are we talking about next week?
I was gonna talk about just not a specific book per se, but just like a conversation about like TV and movie adaptations of some of my favorite books and some that were not so great.
Okay, because then I will bring up Rebecca again next week.
Yeah.
Because I heard of this book because I first saw the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rebecca, which is based on
it kind of
this.
works with that, so we can do them both basically.
Because I was going to bring up the movie just now, but
Yeah, I forgot about that.
instead that I'll say as a teaser for next week.
Yeah, we'll just do it next week. That'll help fill out some time because I just switched jobs like last week, and I cannot read on the bus.
Yeah.
I get severely motion sick if I read on the bus.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
So I have to limit it to just like audiobooks and stuff, and they're like half-hour bus rides, so it takes me a whole week to get through most of a book.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of the same way with like with my job. I maybe get to read for like throughout the entire week, maybe 2 hours.
Yeah.
So it's like at my old job, I used to be able to just sit there and read an entire book in like a shift.
Yeah.
And now that's not really the case.
Once I'm like done my training period at work, I'll be able to listen to stuff while I'm working, and it should be fine. But
nice.
Right now, it's just kind of tough. So.
All right. Well, where can people find us?
They can find us on Facebook, Literary AF. We are on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, LiteraryAFPod.
Podbean.
Podbean. Also, we're on Podbean, LiteraryAFPod. You can email us at literaryafpod@gmail.com. My Twitter is Danni_reads. The Twitter for the podcast, where I upload episodes each weekend, is LiteraryAFPod.
Great. And you can find me hanging out under a bridge in your local area.
Standard troll.
Yeah, just throw some stale, moldy bread down there. I'll thank you for it. No.
Fight off the ducks for it.
You can find me online. Just Google my name. It's
Sheldon.
Sheldon. Just Google Sheldon. Click on the first thing you see.
Right.
I'm not young Sheldon. I'm older Sheldon. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the podcast.
Bye.
Bye.